Hi. So today we're going to cover C syntax. Now for this video, I'm expecting you have some background on C++ and you're quite familiar with that. So with that in mind, we're going to go over mostly like library syntax and console input, console output between C++ and C. So kind of starting off with libraries, this is kind of a helpful chart that summarizes everything. Okay, so if you know in C++, the typical libraries you use are, let's actually first write things out. So we're going to look at this from C++. First thing you do is you include your library. If you're really familiar, you know it's just hash include less than, you have your library name, I'll just write it as lib, and then you close it. That's how you include your library in C++. Now for C, it's literally the same thing, except use hash, also use include. Now here you will use quotation marks to store your library name. And if you go on, oh, I made one mistake. So typically your libraries in C will have a .h, and this is to indicate that it's a header file. Now, there's a lot of explanation into that if you want to look into, but for now, .h, your files in C, and your libraries. Okay, so let's take another file, another library, my bad. Hash, include, let's take the math library, C math. So this is the math library in C++, and then include quotations math.h. Okay, so this is how the syntax for C, and this is the syntax for C++. So there are a couple key things, a couple key patterns you might have picked up on by now, and it's kind of here a lot more neater. And so let's also include one more library. Studio library, include studio, my bad. C studio, and now it's C hash include quotations studio.h. Okay, I just noticed I spelled that wrong. There is no H, and there's no U. It's just studio, like that. Studio. Okay, so I hope by now you've kind of see like a pattern going on. So on both sides, we've got our include and hash on both sides. The key difference is in here, how we include a library. So we've discussed C++, we use these inclusion less than and greater than, while in C, we use these quotation marks. So this is like kind of the first difference we see, right? Now, another thing is, if you know the history of these programming languages, you'll know C is actually one of the first languages, and it's actually what C++ is derived from. So C++ kind of came after C. So you can think of C++ as an upgraded version of C, and it came from C. It took the foundations of C, and it was made to be more user-friendly, programming-friendly, and thus the name C++, which really means +1. So the way I use this history to help me remember its differences. So over here we have quotations. I think of quotations as being more casual, and so I kind of associate that as like more OG. And so the upgraded is like more professional, and so I think of it being more professional using these less than and closing signs if you want to use that to help you remember things. And now, this is the one pattern I want to know. So the math library we use in C++, C math, actually comes from the math library we use in C. But for syntax, we just include C math, C studio, so kind of saying, hey, we're using the C math library, which is actually this library in C. And so you will see a lot of libraries in C can actually be used in C++. You just include C, and then you put in name of the library, and the name of the library will be that library you find in C. And also kind of note that usually in C we'll use the header file, so you want to write .h. So yeah, so if you kind of know this pattern, you're pretty much set for libraries. The syntax of libraries in C++ and C, it's not that bad. And some common libraries we have is IOStream. The way I like to remember this is IO, input output stream. So this deals with kind of like C out, C in, and yeah, it's equivalent. Okay, so let's go through these first. This is the string library, it deals with strings. CMath, this is the math library from C, but like the more upgraded, so we just write CMath to show it's from C. FStream library, F is for file stream. And now if we go to C, we have this, I pronounce it studio.h. And this kind of is just general streams. So it combines both console and file input output. So this would be the equivalent of calling the IOStream library and the FStream library in C++. stdlib standard library from C. This has memory management, so like when you go further down and learn about dynamic allocation, malloc, alloc, yeah. These are just general libraries you might want to know. So now the second thing we're going to cover in addition to like general library syntax is console input, console output, which is like another big difference between C and C++. So whereas in C, we call the IOStream library for input output, and we can simply say cin and cout to call the variable and get store something into that variable, or cout and output with a string literal and the variable name. So again, I'm expecting you have a good foundation in C++. But to review this, essentially when we do console input / output in C++, so starting with input, we'll call the IOStream library for this, by the way. So like I said, hashtag include more professionals in C, IOStream, C++, my bad. And so the syntax for input would be cin, alligator mount open. Okay, and then you put the variable name you want to store your input into. So how this works is, the way I like to remember is this is like an alligator. So whichever side you feed the alligator is where the information is coming in. So when I say cin, I'm feeding the alligator information through this input variable, so it will go into this variable and we'll store it over here. Now on the other hand, for output, we have cout, also from the same library. Alligator will be facing the other way because I'm giving my variable over here to be output. I'm giving it to cout. Now cout, this stream, will output it onto the console for me. And you can output variables that you created previously, and you can also output string literals. String quotation marks. And then we have console input and output. with C. So the library we'd use for this is the studio library. Include quotations stdio dot h, close it. So now what's different about this one, it's a bit more complicated. So we use these things called conversion specifiers. So for input, what we'll do is we'll use scanf, open quotations, and then over here, in this first initial set of quotations, we'll put the data type of the variable. So let's say we want an integer. %I indicates it's an integer, and then let me bring these quotation marks closer. Oh, it's too early. And then we'll put a comma there, and then we'll put the variable name we want to store into. And that's how we take an input for in C. And now, kind of to review these conversion specifier, because this is called a conversion specifier, we have this. Okay, we have the same data types between both C and C++. Now, go through I. Stands for an integer data type. D actually stands for an integer data type as well. We also have LF, which is a long float. This is what we typically use for a decimal. We also have F, which is a float. We also have %C, which is for a character. These are all kind of summarized in the chart as well. Oh, yeah. Okay, and we have %S for string, %C, LF, float, integer. So I want to kind of specifically review this one. So %D being an integer is kind of counterintuitive, and so the reason why this is kind of like an older system, the D actually stands for decimal system. So if you know your number systems, now decimal system is the common system we use to write numbers in the form 1, 2, 3. Other number systems are like the binary system where we only use 0 and 1. And then there's like the hexadecimal system where we will use from 1, 2, 3 all the way to 9 and include A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So this is just, when we get this D we have with integer, is actually come from the name decimal system, which deals with this specific number system. And so that's one way we can understand why it's a D, despite being integer. And between LF actually stands for long float. So the difference between float and double as integer types is that a double is more precise than a float. A double is 64 bits, whereas a float carries 32 bits. And so a double carries up more, it's more precise. So I use that to help me remember long float as opposed to float. And so yeah. And then character, you know what a character is, that's intuitive. C, string, that should also be intuitive. And that pretty much concludes all of everything we're going to go through for C syntax. And here is an example, the standard library. Yeah, you can also include these things like printf if you really like this notation of input and output in C++, if you just call that associated library of C. So kind of a quiz question for you. If I wanted to use printf and scanf, this form of input and output in C++, which library would I call? How would I declare that library in C++? So remember, if we want to use a library from C, #include. We are in C, so we're going to use this and this. But since we're using a library from C, we will first put in the initial C, and then we will call that library stdlib. We won't use the dot header because we don't use that in C++. But yeah, that's your library you want to call if you want to use scanf and printf. Also attach this document in the description box if you want to check it out. Okay, now to kind of go through actual examples on a compiler. Okay, so this will be part 2 of this video.